So to discuss Chapter 1 for public speaking, I want to talk about a few things and just kind of getting started in the class. So the first thing that seems kind of obvious, but is a good starting point, is to think about what makes a good speech. So here's an example speech of a national champion in informative speaking, and I'm only going to play a small clip of it just to give you an idea of what a good speech really looks like.
In almost every corner of our Earth, there is life. Our planet is literally teeming with it. All the way down to the thermal vents of the ocean floor, there is life eking out in existence. There's one place on our planet where life has never been, and yet it affects us every day. A place where life cannot exist, and yet it makes up 99% of our globe. It's the core of our Earth. And here, a smoldering substance about the same consistency as bubble gum churns about in an ocean of molten lava. The core of our Earth is responsible for much more than the occasional volcano. It generates the Earth's magnetic field. This field protects us from dangerous solar winds by which our planet is being constantly bombarded. Lately, this field has been getting weaker and weaker. Now, we're not in danger of it disappearing, but what has happened in the past is that the poles have switched places. In other words, the magnetic North Pole and magnetic South Pole have flipped. This alters our magnetic direction, affects our wind currents, our agriculture, and exposes us to dangerous interstellar radiation. And according to a 2009 issuance by the National Space Weather Program, we may very well be standing on the verge of one such flip. In order to understand more about Earth's magnetic flip, we must first examine the field itself, so that we may then take a closer look at what scientists are discovering about this changing epic structure, and finally, examine some implications of what this might mean for the future of our planet, and what the U.S. and World News Report of September 28, 2008 states will affect every form of life on the entire planet. Now, in order to understand more about Earth's magnetic field, we first have to examine what it's made of, so that we may then take a closer look at how it actually functions. According to a 2009 United States Geological Survey, the main ingredient to the Earth's core is molten iron. Now, iron is interesting because it turns the Earth into a giant magnet, and we're all familiar with the concept of magnetism. Opposite poles attract one another. Well, the Earth's magnetic field extends out of the South Pole, loops around the planet, and re-enters at the North Pole. The shape of this apple is perfect because it demonstrates how the Earth's magnetic field covers most of the planet while denting in at the weaker areas, the North and South Pole. So picture a bar magnet going right through the middle of Earth. Now, if I cut this apple in half, the thickness of the skin represents the crust of our Earth. And as you can see, the majority of our planet is unlike the outer shell with which we are more familiar. Here, molten iron churns about in these oceans and generates the Earth's magnetic field. But what does this field do exactly? Well, much like how this room might...
Well, I'm going to stop it here, and perhaps you want to hear more about the magnetic field of the Earth. But what I hope you are able to see from this particular speech is that he's tackling a concept that most people may not necessarily be familiar with, and he's able to explain it in a fairly relatable way. There's a clear structure to follow in the speech. He gives some attempts to describe something that's interesting about it. He tries to make it relatable to the audience. He tries to show how it impacts his audience. He gives a clear preview, and then once he walks over to give his first main point, there is some internal preview of the particular points he will cover once he gets over there. Plus, a nice little example of the use of a visual aid to really try to demonstrate something he's trying to explain rather than just having something that he is showing. So, with some of those things in mind, I want to talk about why we bother to make you take public speaking and why some of what you just saw is so important to have. Well, one of the first reasons is obviously the jobs want you to have this particular skill, and almost every job listing, they list communication skill as one of the top motivations that they are looking for. Now, if you don't have that skill, they want you to be able to have it, and one of the things they want you to be able to do is to address a group of people, and that's exactly what public speaking consists of. Plus, you should just have this skill anyway. You should be able to talk to a group of people and not be horrified that you're going to be in front of them. It is just going to be useful in your life. And part of what we will cover in this class is not just how to get in front of a group of people, but more specifically how to just simply craft your message, how to say what you need to say in a way that others can understand it, and that can translate to a one-on-one or a one-to-many interaction. And lastly, it kind of makes you an intelligent consumer of information. We'll talk about credible evidence and how you construct the argument and how you organize things. But as you start sorting through information and listening to others speak, you can see when they are missing something or they're not filling in the gaps of really how to explain how something works. And it can make you a little more critical of what others are saying around you and kind of see through the smoke and mirrors that sometimes people throw up there. So what's really different about public speaking? A lot of times people enter this class and think, I know how to talk, so why bother? Well, if you think about a dyad or a one-on-one interaction, it doesn't really look like how we think it looks. So by that I mean it's not you say something, you finish your thought, and then the other person says something, and you sort of really take turns. If you were to look at a transcript of a dialogue, there's no way to make sense of it because one person starts a sentence and the other one says something, and then they change topic and ask a question, and then 2 minutes later the other person answers the question, and you start reading it and you can wonder how in the world are we able to understand each other, but because there's no other audience you're trying to speak to, you're able to kind of keep up with what's going on in the conversation. And by the end of it, you're on the same page. And if someone doesn't understand, they're able to give that feedback and you can rectify that very quickly. When you start adding that third person, just a small group of just 3, if you think about it, if you've been in that situation, it's 2 people take turns talking and the third person kind of listens, or one person talks to both and really just to one, and it's just kind of going around in a circle about who gets to speak. And it's not really a good conversation unless you're very, very close friends and you operate like multiple dyads. But in essence, 2 people become an audience and one person becomes a speaker, but you're able to get that dyad level kind of feedback. But when you go to a mass communication context, 1 to very many, in which the audience may not be present, you have to really think about what your audience may be looking for and be able to say your message very clearly to them so they can understand it, because you don't get feedback. And in the interpersonal level, and not thinking about sort of the dyad level where it's something more familiar that you're talking to, but in an interpersonal like a unfamiliar person, you just sort of know the kinds of things that you do. The, hi, how are you? How was the weather today? How about that sports game last night? Those are sort of scripts that we can go through. But when we put you in front of an audience in a public speaking situation, there isn't necessarily that script to go through. So if you know kind of why we would bother to do this, it's useful to kind of back up to thinking about what the communication process looks like and what public speaking does to satisfy that. This is one of the simplest models of the communication process. And the first thing I just want to point out to you is that it's not a one direction to the other, it's a circle. There's a constant loop of information. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side with the interpreter. And the interpreter in this case is typically what we think about as the speaker, the sender of the communication, in which they will encode information. They will take something that's in their brain and they will transmit it in some way, be it in a game of charades, it's sending an email, writing a note, whether it's saying words. You are doing something to transmit that information into a message, which is then delivered to the receiver or the other interpreter, in which they have to decode what it is that you are doing. So if they don't understand that weird hand motion you're doing in charades, and they didn't understand that was supposed to be an elephant, and it looked like you were just stretching your neck and being a giraffe, they couldn't make sense of it, or they're able to very clearly understand the sentence that you have written because they are familiar with the content. So we are able to take what you have sent and try to match it up with our own memory and our own experiences and try to understand what you transmitted. We will then encode our own response with a nod of agreement, or I have no idea what you're doing, I don't know what that hand motion is, and you will respond with a message and give some feedback. And that continues until eventually you are on the same page. Now, if you think about that in a one-on-one interaction, sometimes that can be rather cumbersome. But when you take a speaker and put them in front of 5, 10, 15, 20, 100, 150 people, it just complicates the ways in which you need to be able to properly encode your message so that the others may adequately decode it and understand what you're trying to send. So what I want you to basically take away from this first chapter is, in some ways, public speaking isn't that difficult, but also just the communication process isn't really as easy as it looks. So we feel like we're good one-on-one, but that one-on-one skill doesn't necessarily translate to a one-to-many situation. You really do need to develop and practice the skills. So I will be providing you with a template for outlines and just a structure for you to use. And the sooner you can sort of internalize that structure, the easier the speeches become. Really, what public speaking is a matter of how to present the information. We don't really cover in this class how to make you this beautiful, eloquent speaker. We don't have the time to be able to do that. Once you have the knowing what to say, we can talk more about how to say it later on. But really where people struggle is they're not sure what to say or how to say it. And so the speeches that you're going to cover, if you think about something you may have seen in an English class, might look something like this, in which they will present the paper or an argument in this triangle structure. And at the top level, you will have your introduction, which is very broad, very general, just sort of eases us into the topic. And then when you get into the body of the speech or the paper, it gets to be a little more specific, it condenses down, becomes a lot more detailed, until finally it's all sort of crystallizes down to that final so what question, what do I do with this information conclusion. So it starts very broad with here's this topic that I'm going to talk about, and at the end you should know this very specific thing that I want you to know about that topic. So in a lot of ways, speeches and papers organizationally and functionally do the same thing. The last thing I want to cover is just kind of talking about being able to use these skills ethically. And ethics are making good decisions based on what is fair and just for people who are around you. And so when might you think about the skills that you use and when could this be useful or not useful? Well, most of you probably aren't going to go out and start a cult, hopefully. That would obviously be a way in which you could use some of these skills unethically. You could use the same motivational structure, the same argument structure that we will cover to do good things and do bad things. And if you compare Adolf Hitler and Abraham Lincoln, they're both identified as very eloquent, strong speakers. Obviously, one had a worse motivation than the other. So how can you tell the difference when someone is using these skills ethically and unethically? One way is to see what it is that you want them to accomplish. Is that something that causes harm to others or harm to themselves? If that is ever in question, that is a topic that you should stay away from. And that will be true for the speeches that you will give in this class. If it is a topic that could potentially cause danger or harm to someone else, then it is a topic that I will strongly advise you to stay away from. So how does all of this help you? Well, part of it is going to be preparing your topics. If you know what is sort of on the table and off the table and appropriate for your audience, it really helps you to narrow things down. And one of the things that you should do that we don't often see enough is to simply justify your topic. Why are you covering this? What does it matter to us? And if you're using appropriate topics and something that matters to us, it's very easy to find information that is reliable and credible and believable to your audience. So knowing some of these basic pieces, you get sort of the idea of what public speaking is about, and in subsequent lectures we'll cover some more